Put your hand on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
And I'll bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I am back from 2 weeks on vacation, and I actually had to go do some preparation for this show. The show we're going to do today is the new Centurions, and I went to Rome, and I walked the beat where the Centurions walked their beat. And there's a reference in the show to explain what I'm talking about, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Before I go on to our show and introduce our guests, I guess I want to remind folks that the LA Mission is in need of your help. The LA Mission, the day before Thanksgiving, puts on a big spread for all the people down at Skid Row, and they provide them with a full Thanksgiving meal with all the trimmings, and then some services that they can that give them some basic clothing, underwear, some shoes, and also do some outreach to give them some treatment if they're so willing. And so I'm asking you to look up the Los Angeles Mission, losangelesmission.org, and make a small donation, $25, $50, $100, to support the Los Angeles Mission and their effort for Thanksgiving, which is coming up. It costs them about $100,000 to put that on. They do get some sponsors, but it generally doesn't cover all of their costs. I'll be down there that day. I generally work volunteer for the Thanksgiving event, and so I'm looking forward to you guys to maybe make a donation to support the Los Angeles Mission as they deal with the homeless in Skid Row. But I also wanted to talk about something else that's very important. A few weeks ago, we did the movie Dirty Bomb. I had Dr. John Sullivan on here and Dr. Eric Fox on, our Deputy Eric Fox on here. And the reason why I want to bring this up is what's going on in Israel. I believe that international terrorism, particularly Islamic terrorism, is still a threat to the United States, and I don't believe that this administration is taking it all that serious. And I think we see the results of that right now. Right now, what we could do is say some prayers for the people over there in Israel and the people who are suffering, and hope that this war ends soon, and they can get the hostages back. But also, I think most of you need to pay attention to what's going on, and rattle the cages of your congressmen, your senators, and say we need to be taking note, and we need to take international terrorism serious. If you look at Biden's first, his national security priority for terrorism, he focused it inward to domestic terrorism. And I thought that was a mistake. I read it shortly after it was written when he came into office, and I felt it was a mistake. And I think we need to be looking outward. That's where our biggest threats are. Okay, so that's my political announcement for today, and my charitable announcement today. So let's get into the show. We have a really great show. Now, one of the guys who's been watching the show, Danny Regalado, he and I work together. And good morning, Penny. Thank you for joining the show again. He and I work together, and he has made some comments, and we always appreciate when he makes his comments as I'm doing my show. In fact, he might have made a comment during the Dirty Bomb. I don't know if he did or not. And so I challenged him to come on the show, and he said he would if we did a Joseph Wambaugh movie. So the movie we're going to do today is well, let me bring my guest on first. So I'll start with the higher ranking guy. We'll bring on Danny Coon, who's been on before. Retired Sergeant Danny Coon has been on before. And Danny wrote a book, and I think he's got it right under there. He's got the page for his book. He wrote a book about post-traumatic stress disorder, which this movie delves into. And so I thought he'd be a good guest to have on for this show. He also did The Onion Field, which is also a Joseph Wambaugh story. Now, that's based on a true story, but there's a lot of similar themes. And Danny Coons, thank you for coming back on and addressing this serious subject. that we're going to get into in this movie.
Thank you, Chief. It's a pleasure to be here again, and we'll have a lot of fun. I had fun with the Onion Field, and we'll have fun with the new Centurions again. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's bring on our second guest. The guy who inspired this show is a retired detective from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Danny Regalado. And Danny and I met at, I think the first time was at Transit. I landed there at Transit. You guys don't know the story, but I got a little bit of political drama in West Hollywood. And so I was given a choice, Lennox or Transit, right? And I said, well, give me a day. What do you need a day for? He said, I want to talk to my wife, see what she thinks. You got to talk to your wife to make a decision. Now, come on. Yeah, I do. And maybe if some of these guys in this movie would have talked to their wives before they made decisions, they wouldn't got divorced. And so I made my decision to go to Transit. And and just to reinforce the comments that I made earlier, the reason why I chose Transit, so you guys are going to learn something here, is we were fighting over in Afghanistan and Iraq, I think at the time. I had handled war demonstrations as lieutenant out West Hollywood, and I wanted to be where we were most likely going to be attacked if we were ever attacked, and that was Transit. And I don't know if Danny, if you agree or not, but that at the time was considered a cul-de-sac, I think, for a lot of people's careers, and I think we turned it around. But that's why I went to Transit, and that's where I met Danny Regalado, and of course he then suggested that we do a Wamba movie, which obviously I knew about the new Centurions. So Danny, welcome to the show. You obviously didn't know that story about me in Transit and how I landed there, but that is the first place that we actually worked together. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. Pretty much the same thing with me. I wanted a DB spot, so when I was working at the time at Lakewood, and their DB is pretty much tied up with guys that were going to be there for a while. So I had the chance to go over in 19. Actually, I went to Transit in 1990. Worked there the first 5 years until we lost the contract. Left for a year and then came back. I think in '97, in beginning of '97, and pretty much stayed there my whole career.
Well, so you recommended Joseph Wamba. So now you showed up a souvenir that you had. You just mentioned a souvenir of a first edition book regarding this movie, right? Can you hold that up for
Yes.
the audience to see? And so you're a Joseph Wamba fan, and I think anybody who got into law enforcement in the 70s and 80s probably has read at least one of his books, and certainly has seen one of his movies. And you
At
told me
least seen one of his movies, yes.
and you got the whole collection of his books. Are they all first edition?
Most of them are. They're all hardback. Yeah, I really got into Wong a little overboard, but yeah, I searched out all his books, and he hasn't wrote anything lately. I don't know if he's ever going to write anything again, but I go back to him now and then. They're very informative to me. They take you back because he writes exactly what you did or what you
Right.
saw.
Well, we do have a comment from Rumble. So welcome from the folks from Rumble that are watching us here. New Centurions, one of my favorite 70s movies. And I remember seeing the movie. I forgot about the ending though. So I was, we'll get into the ending a little bit later, but I always felt no matter what book I read or movie I saw regarding John Wamba and that he wrote about the dark side of policing, alcoholism, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicides, cop suicides, things like that. And so as much as I enjoyed the dialogue in the books and that kind of stuff, the darkness of the stories was concerning. What do you think, Danny Coon? You agree with that?
That's exactly what it is. You look at all of his books have some type of suicidal ideation in it. And most of his books talks about the post-traumatic stress issues.
And so before we go further in the movie, I really want you to talk about your book, Danny Coon, and talk about post-traumatic stress and just give us like a couple minutes how you got into it and why you wrote the book.
Okay, about 5-6 years ago, after my father passed away, I started learning about law enforcement suicide. I had read an article in early 2017 about law enforcement suicide outweighed line of duty deaths every year. And it kind of surprised me. And around the same time, and this goes in hand with the movie, is I read an article about a retired Long Beach police sergeant who committed suicide at South Station in Long Beach. And it kind of bothered me, and I started looking into it. I live down in the Oceanside area, so I'm surrounded by active duty and former Marines or veterans. And so I talked to them a lot about their issues with post-traumatic stress. And I decided I'm going to start blogging on post-traumatic stress issues among first responders, because although police officers has a high suicide rate, firefighters also, and the medics, and I don't have the numbers today, I didn't look them up, but we're about one first responder suicide every 48 hours, and that it shouldn't be like that. And as I'm looking into it, I'm finding out that a lot of agencies do not have programs for first responders. And unlike, LAPD, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, San Francisco, California Highway Patrol, New York, Chicago, they're all large agencies, and they have help available. But most police departments I think they were under about 50 officers, and they don't have big budgets to have different programs to help officers. So I joined in, and I blog now about law enforcement post-traumatic stress issues among first responders. And I wrote a book recently. It's called Broken. I'll show it to you. It's called Broken and Dealing with the Effects of Post-Traumatic Stress. And it's a book. It's not a personal story. It's a book about the who, what, where, when, where, and how, and why you get affected like that. And it starts off with a story about how your body works and how your brain works. And then it goes through the different type of stresses that we deal with on a daily basis, all the way up until the end. And all of my writings are faith-based, and this is a faith-based book. So it is available on Amazon. Just Google my name, or not Google my name. Go into Amazon search bar and type in Danny Coon, and the book will pop up.
Well, I appreciate your efforts to bring this issue to light for first responders. If you look in the comments, Pop Culture Minefield has placed the link to Danny's book, so you can pull it up online and purchase it. If you have a friend who's a first responder, it might be a good gift to give them. I think a lot of people suffer alone. I know that I've had my own experience with post-traumatic stress. I think the disorder comes in is when it begins to negatively influence your life. It becomes a disorder. I don't know if that's true, but I would say the effects were over the years has been relatively mild on me, but it impacts people in different ways. And so if you have somebody who is a first responder or the military, Danny's book might be a good gift for them to get and to open up that discussion regarding post-traumatic stress. So let's get into our movie, guys, and let me give you a quick intro on the movie. The new Centurions is based upon a book by Joseph Wambaugh. Now, he completed the book in 1971. That's when it was released, and the movie was released in 1972. So Wambaugh had a reputation in Hollywood already, and they bought the rights to his book, and the movie came shortly after the book. And he actually had an incentive program when they bought the rights to the book. The longer his book stayed on the New York Times best-selling book, he got I think at the time, so 72, he got $1,400 extra a week, and it stayed for 32 weeks. So he made some extra money there because the book was popular, and a lot of people bought it. But it's the interesting thing is the movie. It doesn't really say exactly the time period that's going on. At least I didn't necessarily notice that, and it didn't say that in some of the write-ups. But when I looked up the book, it was supposed to be from the period of 1960 to 1965. So these are new guys that come in, and they're placed with older guys and to get mentored before we had FTO programs. And then the culmination is the riots, and they come back together in the riots, and that's kind of the end of the they start ending the story. Now, I understand the book and the movie are different, but this is a new neo-noir action crime film. And like I said, based on the book by Joseph Wambaugh in 1971. It stars George C. Scott, who also got his Oscar for Patton, right? I love George C. Scott. And, when I look for, what's the one, A Christmas Story, or the one where he plays Scrooge. When I look for the Scrooge movie at the holiday season, I look for his movie because I liked his characterization of Scrooge. But it also has Stacy Keach in it. Now, Stacy Keach starred in a a series called My Camera, right? Everybody remembers that. But one of my favorite movies involving Stacy Keach was The Long Riders. Now, if you remember that movie, it's a Western regarding it had Jesse James and who were the other people that they work with? The Younger brothers, right? But it was all brothers that were in the movie. So you had Randy Quaid, Dennis Quaid that was in the movie, and you had Stacy Keach, who played, I think, Frank James, and then James Keach, who played Jesse James. So it was really, I just enjoyed the movie. I thought it was a good Western. And when I think of him first, that movie first. And of course, he does the narration for a show now that's going on called American Greed. And I will say, every now and then in California, for those who are watching this video everywhere, you see an actor. So I was going to church one Christmas, and in Malibu, I live close to Malibu, and Stacy Keach walked in. Right now, he's a little older, but I recognized him. So, but I like Stacy Keach. I remember he played a character, Killer Kane, in this kind of cult B movie where he beats up a bunch of bikers too. So, but also Scott Wilson. Now, if you watch the show that I did on In Cold Blood, he played one of the killers in Cold Blood. He's also I recently started watching Bosch, the series. He's in that show as well. And I had binged The Walking Dead for a while too, and he was so he's a versatile actor. He's been around for a long time, and he's also, as a young actor, he's in this movie as one of the guys. And then Eric Estrada, who also starred in the television show Chips, is in this movie as a young Latino, turning his back on his Chicano roots and becoming a police officer. So those are kind of the main characters in the movie. And anyways, did you like the movie, Danny Coon?
Yes, I did. I enjoyed it. It did bring back, like Danny Regalado said. And Chief, I kind of get a kick out of it because last time I was on the show, your co-host was also another man named Danny. So
yeah, I know.
So I think one of these times we had to have me, Danny, and Danny Smith, Danny Regalado, and me. So it'll be real.
You got to mention Danny Smith. Just Danny, what a great writer he's turned out to be, and his latest book, Nothing Left to Prove. Just if you haven't read it, you need to. It's a great book. It takes you back. And I always kid him, when you make the movie, save me a little bit part there, Danny. But yeah, his writings are fantastic.
Well, once he starts making movies, I'm going to review him, right? So
yeah, exactly.
he's in trouble. Yeah, the movie actually, growing up in the 70s, this book came out in 71, so I was probably about 14 or 13 years old, and that's about the time I became a law enforcement explorer in Orange County. And so it was like, Wamba's writing these books, and we kept reading them all the time.
Yeah.
And kind of living them vicariously. And then when I came onto the department in 81, you heard the stories. You heard the stories about the divorce, and you heard this and that, and it was a lot of fun, just watching it again and bringing back the old memories. And that's what they are. They're stories, and every year the stories get better. So,
well, his stories are based upon true life, though. Danny Regalado, what do you think? Do you like the book? And give me your thoughts.
The book is always a little bit deeper than the movie, like any other movie, book to movie. Yeah, I like I said, I've probably read all his books. And Choir Boys, New Centurions, probably one of the two that hit you with that. Yeah, I remember that, or that stuff really does happen, type of thing. But yeah, the movies. In fact, I just rewatched the movie before we're going to do this, just to see it. The only way you can find it is on YouTube.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great movie. It just takes you back, and then it leads on into other things. Police Story, even Adam 12, and all this good series that came after that. So yeah, I really love it.
I think it's hard to make a show about patrol officers, and to be, it's one thing to do a show on detectives, right? Because you could show the things that they do to find the suspect, and they're really only usually pursuing one suspect. But a patrol officer, it's what I liked about patrol. I was a detective for a while, but I prefer patrol because it was something new every day. and you dealt with different problems every day. Sometimes they're the same type of problem, but it was different people. And so when I saw this movie, and I'm remembering back to Choir Boys and some of the other stuff, some of the other movies. I haven't done that movie yet. I will do that movie. Maybe I'll bring this team back together, because some dark themes in that one as well. But he does a pretty good job of capturing the dialogue that real dialogue that police officers have between each other, and you see it in his movie and you see it in his book. So I think, and I started reading his stuff because my dad was a lieutenant for Detroit Police. So growing up, and my uncle was a Wayne County sheriff. So I was surrounded by the whole law enforcement stuff. And so, of course, he's reading it. And you're a kid in the house. Your dad reads a book. You read a book, right? So it's not like you got to pick what book you got to read. What was there. I had like 5 siblings, so you scrambled to read what was there. And I wasn't interested in reading what my sisters read. That's for sure. So I read my dad's stuff, and I got hooked on his stories. I wouldn't say it was necessarily why I went into law enforcement, but it definitely was an eye opener to me. And I remember that some of those dark themes in the movie were things that I saw going on in my relationship with my father, and going on with the Detroit Police Department as well. So here it is, this author is writing about Los Angeles police, yet many of the same themes can be consistent with other big cities and issues in other big cities. And my dad certainly identified with those things. I'm sure that's why the book were important to him at the time. But let's get into the first scene, and it's the briefing scene. This is the dark humor and the hazing scene. I know they do some academy stuff, but I really wanted to do this because one of the big things that law enforcement is misunderstood about is kind of the dark humor and a little bit of the hazing or the needling that goes on in briefing. And it might sound unprofessional, and I know we've kind of cleaned up our act a little bit, but I think during the briefing they talk about somebody getting murdered, maybe a pimp getting murdered by his prostitute or something like that. I can't remember who got murdered. And, of course, they were all real disappointed, and they expressed their opinions. And I think this was also Danny Coon. This was one where they talked about, how you really should do it versus, I think it might happen in the car too. But and one of the other things is the sergeant asked a question. Of course, nobody really wants to answer the question correctly, but the new guy does. Do you remember that? I think that happened in this briefing as well. So what do you think of the scene, Danny Coon?
Yes, it did happen, and it still happens. It happened to me when I was a sergeant doing a briefing one time. I asked just a really benign, forced question, and everybody just sat there. All you heard was crickets for a couple of minutes. And where I worked at, there was a whole gang of overtime people. So I had guys like Danny Regalado working for me. I had guys from SEB, and nobody wanted to answer up. And some kid that just got off training who's working overtime gave the answer. And it was hilarious when I saw that. Some of the other things in that was my first day as a off the streeter, where I was hired to work the jail before going through the academy. And this was in November of 1981, the weekend after Thanksgiving. And I walked into the PM shift, and I think there was probably about 150, 200 other deputies in there. And the sergeant's up trying to give briefing, and it was funny. It was these guys were tame compared to that briefing. The shenanigans that happen in briefings, they're true, they're real.
Well, in this briefing also, Stacy Keefe asked a question, should we book them first, whatever, which, generally there weren't a whole lot of questions in briefing, and you were supposed to reserve your questions for your partners, right? You didn't generally ask them. And of course, the sergeant blows them off. Yeah, well, maybe we could talk about that tomorrow. Like, go figure out and ask somebody else is really what the message was there. And as a professional, what do you think, Danny Regalado, with that?
Yeah, that was a funny one. That was the we'll get back to you. So basically, it was like, just figure it out yourself, like any good deputy would, But yeah, that briefing is that's an everyday briefing, and like you said, there's jokes going around. But I don't know if Danny will agree with me, but with PTSD, I think if you think back now, I think it's just the way cops relieved themselves of things they saw and things they knew they might have to do, and it was like a release point with a bunch of your peers. So yeah, that briefing scene was funny, and the Watts sergeant there, he's a character actor from Hill Street Blues also. And but yeah, the no one, everybody looking at each other waiting for somebody to answer was always the catch.
Yeah, I did like they give the description of the killer they're looking for, and he has to be a black guy. And one guy says, "Well, that sounds like you, Gladstone. I think we got him,
Yeah.
right?" When I
Exactly.
first started, there was absolutely, everybody would just chuckle and move on, and it was no big deal. But nowadays, everybody gets offended, so you got to walk on eggshells in briefings now, and it's very controlled. You don't get to say that, but that did happen in the beginning, and it was really. It was more tongue in cheek. It was just funny, and it was stress reliever. And so, Danny Coon, we just got a comment from Danny Regalado that hey, part of this is just dealing with stress, right? And what do you think?
Danny is correct. It gives us, even though it's kind of a sick and dark way, it gives us just a way to relieve himself. In his book, The Warrior Poet, written by John Lovell, he's a veteran, former Army Ranger, did several deployments. He has a chapter or part of a chapter in his book about dark humor and all of, and it's quite interesting. It's something that I am researching now that will be on a future blog. And it's definitely a stress reliever. It just clears our mind, and because we see, when you see the worst of the worst, you kind of find a little chuckle in it every once in a while. There was a meme on Facebook a couple of weeks ago about some detectives standing around and looking over a murder scene, and one guy's sucking down a cup of coffee, and it's like, you got to eat when you got to eat. When you have time, you got to do what you got to do when you have time to do it. And I chuckled at it, but I'm sure some civilian wouldn't see the humor in that.
Well, certain things activate certain memories.
Yeah.
You're going around even today, and it's funny. This morning, I got a text from an old partner from Linwood, and I haven't talked to him in years. He's living in Texas, and he just texted me and he goes, "Hey, I remember this call I was on. I think I was with you." And things like that just pop up out of the blue, and so I got to give him a call back because I don't know if you know him. His name's Bobby Gabolt. But great guy. He's a Golden Glove boxer. He was a boot trainee when he came to Linwood, but just an excellent guy. I think he ended up retiring as a lieutenant.
Did you say Gilbolt?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know him. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he finish up at EOB or something like that?
I think it was EOB. I know he was SCBA after he left Linwood. He went on, but just a great cop. In fact, they would bring him in the academy because of his boxing skills when we were still boxing at the academy, and they'd put him in the ring, and it was just something to watch. And of course, that occasionally went into the field when we were in training, when we were at Linwood. But yeah, so things like that just pop up, and you get texts from guys, "Hey, wasn't that you with me when on this call? I was, I just happened to be asked a question about something, about a weirdest call I've ever been on, and this one popped up." And so yeah, things like that just pop up out of the blue.
Yeah, a friend of mine was writing a book, and he called me up. "Hey, did you say this? Because I'm putting something in." I go, "No, I don't think I said that, Bob." It says Bobby Rangel was guy. It was not consistent with something that I would have said, so I don't remember. But what the funny thing is about I took a guy out on his first. It was his first night, and I wasn't an FDO, right? But it was a busy night, and I ended up chasing some robbery suspect, doing a containment, and catching the guy, and to me, it was just another Friday night, right? I completely forgot about it. And he saw me years later, and I ended up having him on the show, but he told me, he says, "Yeah, I remember every detail about that night because it was his first night. And all of that stuff had a very big impression upon him. But for me, it was, that's just Friday." So it's weird how things just pop in your brain, and that is part of post things that there are things that get cemented in your brain from post-traumatic stress or things, and these guys all live with this as they begin their career and go through that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, now I'm watching the movie, and so I need to talk to their technical advisors because everybody's slick-sleeved in the movie. Did you notice that?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's got the hash marks, because each hash mark is 5 years, right? For us, it's stars. For LAPD, it's hash marks. And I'm going,
Well,
They got to
A lot of
fire
these,
their technical advisor. What do you think?
but a lot of those guys in this movie, like Eric Estrada, Stacy Keach, they were all brought basically just out of the academy, and they went to this station division. So really, the only ones you see with any 5-year markers on their sleeve is the Watts Sergeant, and that's about it. But yeah, the rest of them are pretty much brand new and green.
Yeah,
Yeah, the old guy with the cigar sticking out of his mouth. He
Yeah,
said he had 40 some odd years
Yeah,
on the
Clinton
department, but
James.
he had like
well,
20
those are
years
a
worth of
badge of
stripes
honor.
on there.
So I mean,
Yeah,
you know how it is. You didn't make rank, but you made sure everybody knew how many years you did. You know, and so
yeah,
I just felt some of the older guys should have had some hash marks on their sleeve. I mean, it's weird what you notice about stuff, but
yeah.
that's a very important thing. I will tell this story. So my ex, I got promoted to lieutenant, and I'm sitting at this table, and there was a chief there. I won't say who it was, and he had all the stars. And she says, when does my husband get all that stuff? When does he get to be a chief with all those stars? I'm like, oh God, I guess I should have explained that stuff. Or first, you don't ask that question. And I should have explained what the stars meant, but it was a little embarrassing. And unfortunately, the chief was good about it. So let's get into the next show. It's Kovalevsky's Law. So I know you guys all dealt with this. And when you were on your first ride. Now, what I noticed in the movie, it's different than when we all trained, is, they put them with some seasoned guys to let them learn the ropes, right? But in us, we have transitioned, we have moved forward. When we all went out to patrol, you had your field training officers, right? So, and it was a lot more structured than what you see here. But he's riding with Kovalevsky, and he starts telling him how you should conduct yourself. These things you don't necessarily get in the academy. You don't necessarily get in patrol training. And of course, he says Kovalevsky's Law is one of them. I wrote down is treat everybody the same. Now that one's, to me, that's pretty easy. Yeah, treat everybody the same. Then you avoid accusations of discrimination or whatever. But it just is easier if you treat everybody the same way every time. And then he talks about his escalation of force. Now, it was a little, kind of an escalation. We have this notion where it's you use the force you need to use, but he does talk about, hey, they bring a knife, you use a gun, you do whatever you have to do to win, right? He does talk about that. So what'd you think of that scene where he's given his experience through his series of laws there, Danny Coon?
It's kind of funny because I trained at a slower station, so I really didn't get a lot of the this is how you do it on the streets, other than everybody treat everybody the same. And I think you learn that coming out of the jail, as we did. You learn that in the jail where you treat everybody the same, and then you get out into the streets and it's the same thing. You treat everybody. But after I transferred from the slower station to East Los Angeles, I was retrained. you do hear a lot of things about, you want to work graveyard shift, this is how you're going to do it, and this is what you're going to do. And you had to get voted onto that shift.
Yeah. Shifts get very cliquish. Yeah, it gets very cliquish sometimes. But Danny Regalado, so your first night in a radio car, your first few weeks, did you get the kind of, hey, this is how we do it, kid, conversation?
Yeah, actually, it's funny because we're all deputies when we started, and your career actually doesn't start in a patrol car. It starts at whatever off the streets assignment they send you to. And mine, it's funny. I always repeat this because it's true. I got sent to Biscay's for my first 2 weeks, and back then, this is '82.
Yeah.
You get there, and of course, there's a character like Clinton James there, an old timer, two striper, hard four, and he brings you aside and he tells you, he goes, okay. He tells me this. He goes, okay, kid. He goes, there's 3 things you need to remember. He goes, first thing is, every Wednesday night here at BC, it's steak night. That's when they would bring in the food from the ranch. He goes, so you never miss Wednesday night. He goes, second thing, when you get a patrol, you make sure you take care of all your personal business then, because Saturday and Sundays are your days off. So if you can take care of it, take care of it. And the most important thing he ever told me that I always remember to this day, he goes, don't ever take anything personal, because you won't last. You won't last a career here if you take things personal. So that was my patrol radio car thing. But then, I went to HOJJ and then eventually to Linwood as a training. And of course, you go to a fast station, uh, someone's going to pull you aside and tell you, hey, look, all that other stuff they taught you and everything, throw it out the window because this is the way we do it. It's fast. We take care of each other, and everybody needs to go home, but get ready to fill that back seat because that's what we do here. He goes, but you're also taught that, just like Kovinsky said, you treat everybody fair. You give everybody that fair shot at the beginning. And if it escalates from there, it does. But you don't start off at number 10. You start off at number 1. And yeah, it's like Danny said, come from a slow station to East LA, yeah, you're retrained. We had guys that came from other stations to Linwood, and you'd look at them a little different, but then you would just tell them, hey, man, you gotta get with a different program here.
Well, I trained at
Step
West
up your
Hollywood,
game.
which was kind of a mixed station. It wasn't as fast as Linwood, but it was still fairly fast, but it was different kinds of problems.
Yeah, you know
So,
what? I did when they were still doing the ride-alongs,
yeah.
I did a couple of West Hollywood, and if it wasn't for the distance, I think that would have been a great station to work. But I always had great experience when I go up there and maybe work an overtime spot, or even when I was doing the ride-alongs or the parades and things like that. Uh, but yeah, that West Hollywood could be a very fast station in a different way.
I think most people didn't realize. So all the other communities, most communities, they roll up the streets at at 2:00. Even some of the more dicier neighborhoods, things slow down, right? But not West Hollywood. You got meth hypes there. There, it's on, and everybody's they get out of the bars at 2:00, and they still want to party, and all the wallflowers are walking the street looking to make the love connection. So it's still
It's a 24-hour, 7-day city. I mean, people don't realize that. I mean, if all they had to throw in was a little gambling up there in West Hollywood, and you have a baby Vegas, but yeah, it would be. Everybody monitors everybody else's channel. So back in the day, you had your scanner, your car, and yeah, Friday, Saturday nights in West Hollywood, man, it would get busy up there.
Well, it's which kind of leads into one of his comments here. To forget that Hollywood crap, and which is one of the things that was said in by Kilvinsky. Forget that Hollywood crap, and the notion that you hit a guy once, he's going to go down or something like that. It's gonna be a dog fight. Most fights are going to be a dog. You're going to be. People don't go if they don't want to go down easy. It's going to be a tough fight. Most people don't realize that. I think that's one of the downside to everybody having a camera and not ever being involved in a fight is they don't know what it really takes to actually take somebody to jail that doesn't want to go to jail, which is why we get I think that's why we get a lot of criticism today. Because I remember when I was a kid, they asked, how many of you guys have been involved in a fight? We had about, I don't know, 120 people, maybe 140, and only about a third of us raised our hands. And I said, yes, I was one of them, right? And then they asked the question, how many have been involved in more than one fight? And I still had my hand up, and I'm looking around going, hey, I went to Catholic schools in the Midwest. What is going on here? So so I kind of knew, when somebody when it's game on, it's going to be, if somebody doesn't want to go to jail, you're in a fight, and it ain't going to be easy. So yeah, forget about that Hollywood crap. They're not going to go down with one punch. You're in a fight, and you're in a fight too. You're paid to win. You're not paid to lose. That's one of the things I was taught. And I think that's an accurate statement. Any comment on that, Danny Coon, before we're going to the next scene?
That is true. If you don't want to go to jail, it's going to take more than just one person. And a lot of times it'll take 5, maybe 10. I remember the first person that fought me when I was trying to take to jail is I was a military police in the Army. And I was some young kid on phencyclidine PCP. And I was at a small Army base with I think we had about a platoon size of an MP detachment. And all I could do is we're fighting this guy. It was me and another guy, and we're fighting him, and we just couldn't wait to see the radio cars and hear the sirens of the other units coming to help us out. And then I parlay that into when I worked up in Lancaster, I was sued for use of force, and it was in federal court, and it was a 3-week trial, and the chief's name escapes me now, but he went up and testified. He was a use of force expert. And the first thing he told the jury in federal court was, force is ugly. And if when you look at it that way and you understand, people aren't going to want to go to jail. They're not going to go to jail. They're going to fight you for their life. And he goes, and these guys had to do what they had to do. Force is ugly. And so when you see these things on YouTube now or Facebook, all this of someone getting body slammed down into the ground, well, force is ugly. And there's a reason before that. You have to look at the whole story and not just the 30 seconds of the clip that they're showing on TV.
I'll say this before we move on. Actually, we do have rules, but they're not the Marcus of Queensberry rules, right? There are some boundaries, but you are there to meet the needs of the people. And if somebody has to go to jail to keep the community safe, that's what you're expected to do. Unfortunately, most of the people don't really understand that. And I want to let's bring up the domestic violence scene. But as we do that, I did want to say Stacy Keach, as he's riding out on Kavinsky, he's got some of these kind of liberal views, and but that changes over time.
Yeah, you got to remember, Stacy Keach came into this wanting to be a lawyer.
Yes,
He was supposed to be going to school to be an attorney, and and I think you've known a few guys like that too. That they're doing the job because they need a paycheck, but they're going to college. I wasn't one of those guys, but you worked with guys like that, and then you slowly see them change, and then the next thing you know, hey dude, how's school going? Well, I'll put that on hold for right now. And their lives change because the job changes you. And there's a lot of things in this movie, especially the husband-wife scene that we'll get into, that they change you.
I was one of those guys going to school, and I was going to go to law school, but it just took so long for me to finish my bachelor's degree going part-time. I didn't get my degree till I was 35, and unfortunately, I learned a lot when going to school because I studied political science especially in public administration, that allowed me to be a pretty good leader and a good manager, and so school definitely benefited me. But I will say, and you see it with Stacy Coon, but let's talk about this scene first, domestic violence. And I love this scene about domestic violence because when we first came on, how we handled domestic violence was completely different than how we handle it now. You were allowed to apply the spirit of law. You were allowed to separate people. You were allowed to find ways to solve the problem without necessarily taking everybody to jail. You know what? I think we got the wrong scene on this one. I'm showing the lady where they we're showing this is the scene where they arrest the counterfeiter. But anyways, let's go ahead with the domestic violence anyways. So, but in domestic violence, one of the things that I noticed on the domestic violence when we lived it, and then what you see in the movie, and here's the domestic violence scene now, is you were able to solve those problems, and all of us did that. And over time, everything got so much tougher on domestic violence to the point where simple batteries were now felonies, or just the accusation of a simple battery was now a felony, and we were taken to people to jail for those felonies. And if you didn't, you were going to be targeted for arrest yourself there for a while if you didn't make that arrest. And then we were ashamed to make those arrests. But here in this scene, they're able to handle it, and I think personally probably handle it better than I think we're handling it now. But that's my opinion. I'll explain that a little bit more after I get a little more comments from you. Danny Coon, what do you think of the whole domestic violence? How we handled then, how we handle now? Do you have an opinion on that?
In reality, the domestic violence laws now, they need to be looked at a little bit more, because there's your one-time DV guy that goes out and gets drunk and does bad things to his spouse, or it could be a guy or a girl. It doesn't matter. And then there's the habitual violent offender. And so there still needs to be some leeway there. And there's really not, other than, you get arrested on Friday night for DV, and then on Saturday morning, your other half is denying charges and stuff like that. And now detectives are pulling up 911 calls and doing other stuff. But you have to look at the bigger problem, and that's something that law enforcement, it's not our issue. We're to solve the problem for the night, take them to jail, or do whatever, and then the courts and on social services have to figure out the problem elsewhere.
And It's now mandatory in LA County. It's mandatory arrest, mandatory prosecution. So even and the theory is even if the case is weak, still throw the full force of the state against the offender, usually a man, and because they also in California, which is the most extreme, they said you're supposed to try and figure out who the primary aggressor went, and even they even say in the law that the primary aggressor isn't necessarily the person who starts it. So I have some real issues because I really think we need to reform those laws. But when we started, you could look at a situation and try and solve that problem, Danny Regalado. And in the scene,
he had
actually,
a lot of discretion at that time. You know,
we used to, yes.
Just like that scene, you know, you and I, we've been to that scene 100 times, and you had discretion. You were able to find out, okay, who is the aggressor, who isn't the aggressor. Can we solve this with put your hand on my badge? You know, but and a lot of times you cleared that call at 212 and went on your business. But you know, there's a lot of times where I think the new laws are there for a purpose. Yeah, because there's a lot of times, you know, and I know that you went to a call and assist, and you left, and maybe the handling unit, you thought, you know, maybe we should have hooked this guy or hooked her up, and I think the laws now, they took away all your discretion, basically say you're going to hook somebody up, if not both of them. And then again, now you tie up the courts, and now you know that filing cases. You know, the wife doesn't want to prosecute, or the husband doesn't want to.
Busy night. Sometimes you just want to solve those problems in an easy way. It wasn't, you know, we were accused of, I remember, hey, male cops aren't making the arrest because they're part of the evil patriarchy. That was being said at the time. And, you know, when you actually look at the data, 60% of men are the suspects and 40% are women. And that's not an insignificant number, 40% of women as the offenders, yet they're treated differently in the courts, and there's studies to show that. I just think we need to pull back from the whole evil patriarch thing and look at it, I think, from from a standpoint of family interactions and family dynamics, because I think if you're raised in a family where violence is tolerated, whether it's the woman or the man that are doing it, you know, it presents an example to the children, who then think using force out on the streets is okay too, because that's how they do it in the home. So I really think we need to rethink how we do domestic violence, because I think that could be, you know, one of the keys to reducing violence in our overall society. But we can't do that if the punishment is driven by ideology, is how I see it. But the funniest thing on this scene was when he did the divorce for it. Now I got to ask you a question, you know, and whoever answer first, what did he do in there that you thought was comical? When he did his salute, whose salute is that?
That's a Boy Scout salute.
That's exactly right. You know, I was looking at that thing. I did not. So yeah, the Boy Scout salute is, you know, you fold the little finger down and thumb over the little finger with 3 fingers up, and that's the Boy Scout salute. And so he hasn't put the hand on the badge, right? Does the Boy Scout salute? I go, oh my God, he's doing the Boy Scout salute.
The funny thing though is the expression on his partner, the younger guy. Because he's like, okay, we can do this.
Now, Danny, you coming from Linwood, I've never seen it done, but I've heard plenty of stories from the 2-5 and from Firestone of guys doing that. And this was back in the early 80s.
Oh yeah.
And I hear those stories, and I just
the Linwood Firestone divorce. Oh yeah, it happened. I don't know if it came from that movie, and everybody said, okay, it worked in the movie and the book. We'll do it. But yeah, the Linwood divorce.
Before that.
And adding, you know, and this is probably the comedic, ironic, or dark humor of Joseph Wambaugh a little bit, that they had it written in there, or maybe this wasn't in the book, I don't know, but whoever thought of it using the Boy Scout salute in that was hilarious. And, you know, in the first part of that scene, you know, they write a check. What I came away from that part of the scene, when you look for the guy who's passing the checks in the neighborhood, is Kilminski knows who the crooks are in the area, right? He's got this drunk lady. She says the behavior. She gets kind of the description a little bit wrong, but he knows where to go. Okay, and if you're a good street cop, you know who to look for, right? And I mean, I worked the hypes, so if I saw a hype in a car, I knew it was stolen, right? You know, because I knew my beat, right? And if I can get a hype who's under the influence, and I know he's got stolen credit cards or something in his pocket, you know, which was what I was looking for. I was I mean, I really didn't care that much about the meth that he had or that they were under influence. I mean, they went to jail for that stuff, but I was hoping to get stolen property and, make a reasonable cause burg arrest. But it just showed.
The hypes are the common denominator every place you've worked. I mean, you could work Glenwood, you could work West Hollywood, East LA. Even when I had to go to Lomita for a year, I worked the hypes there on PCH. Lomita's not the fastest station, but hey, there's always a hype around that leads to, or a bit of dope, or So the
when I was
hypes
a
are.
Lomita, we'd go down into Pedro, or you'd go over into
Yeah.
actually over in the county area, Torrance and stuff like that. But you're talking about knowing your crooks. When I worked at East LA, first 3 years, 2.5 years, I worked graveyard shift. And at East LA, you start off in commerce and you work your way up into when you get voted in to work the county area, or what they call the North End. We're sitting in briefing one night, and we had one guy. He had been on Early's probably for 25 years at the time. And he would always chime in during briefing on the sergeant be given out a suspect description. And one night he gave out this suspect description. He has a male Hispanic gangbanger, like about 5'11", wearing white shirt and khaki pants, and long or comb back black hair. And old Mother Floyd, he chimed up and he goes, "Yeah, that sounds like so-and-so from such and such gang." And we all just about threw our coffee cups at him, because you're full of crap. You don't know what you're talking about. Well, sure enough, he went out and found so-and-so from such and such gang, came back in, he was good for a handful of robberies. And he knew the streets. He knew who he was talking about.
Yeah.
And he was probably about 70% right on just these very general crime descriptions, or suspect descriptions.
I worked the hypes because they were the ones doing the burgs, right? And the car thefts, and in West Hollywood, they would go into a sub garage and break into 20 cars and blow punks. Those were that was the big radio that they were stealing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they flip them for some money to get a score. And so I always worked those guys, and I knew who they were. And people asked, how do you make all these arrests? Well, if you're not doing a 3-hour lunch and you're out there working the hypes, and you get to know that, because you have to talk to them. That's it. You have to talk to them. And some of the guys, we don't have to I don't have to talk. Yeah, you do. If you really want to solve crimes, you talk to them, because sometimes they actually give you information on stuff too as well. So, but I always worked the hype, and that's when I saw the scene where he went to, I think the bad guy's name was Gamby. He goes, "Well, this is the guy from the neighborhood." He kind of knew him, which I thought was kind of cool. Well, let's go into the next scene. Loitering with intent to commit prostitution is what I called this scene. But it's in West Hollywood, of course. There was a variety of people doing prostitution. We had men, we had women, and we also had transsexual prostitutes. And so it was an interesting place to work. And so when I saw this scene, and when I first got there, there were old stories just prior to me getting there. And I got to West Hollywood in '85, because we shared a common area with LAPD. I mean, we were so close to each other. They would walk from Hollywood into West Hollywood, and then our guys would walk them back, which was the story, right? So prostitution was pretty deep and pretty regular in West Hollywood. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll in West Hollywood. So I saw the scene, and it kind of reminded me of us doing our prostitution sweeps. But it also brings up some changes in the law that I need to talk about here in California, because we do get into politics a little bit here. And I think it was in January, we got rid of the loitering with intent to commit prostitution. And of course, our misguided folks up in Sacramento said it's because the police officers are harassing, people who are just dressed provocatively. They're not really doing anything wrong. We have some crazy people up there who think sex work is legitimate work. And it's funny, because I think we probably have saved as many women and young boys from sexual exploitation by just interceding and talking to them and getting them off the streets. I think we had Angels of the Night was a social service agency that we worked with, but two agencies who worked with people who were sexually exploited said, no, that's a bad idea. The cops are sometimes our only saviors out there. So first of all, reflect upon the scene. Have you ever participated in a prostitution sweeps where you're cleaning up all the ladies. In our case, it was ladies or guys. And what do you think about the change in the law? Good idea, bad idea? I'm assuming it's going to be a bad idea. What do you think, Danny Regalado?
You know what? We used to participate at times in Linwood and sometimes Lakewood too. Long Beach Boulevard in Linwood between like Compton Boulevard, Century Boulevard, and Vice would come out, of course, and they do typically like this, a van sweep. Sometimes they would just go pick up all the girls or guys and then bring them back to the station. Same thing with Lakewood, Artesia Boulevard. They would do the same thing there, but uh, you know. uh, Next to a hype or anything, some of these girls were really good informants
Yeah.
because they knew if they were getting in trouble and you were driving by, they could wave you down or someone would even tell you, hey, can you throw me in the car and get me out of here? Take me to the next block because this guy is whatever. But yeah, a lot of them become are great informants. And it's a give and take, just like with the hypes. I didn't take every hype to jail that I stopped,
No.
nor did I take every, prostitute or to jail either because they're good informants, when you needed something. And their loyalty, I wouldn't say is 100%, but if they know you're doing your level and you're fair, they'll occasionally give you something good.
Well, that brings up how Kilvinsky talked to them. Now, he talked to them.
Exactly.
He talked to them well, which means they opened up to him and talked to him, and I think that's important. Danny Coon. So one, same question to you, but also if we can't do loitering with intent to commit prostitution, we can't make those arrests, which is basically what they were doing that night and what we did a lot. And you have to do stings. It's a lot more effort, right? You have to get plain clothes. You got to get a few people together. It's an ops plan. It takes a lot more work and costs a lot more money to solve a problem.
It's actually a huge issue. And to go back on to the first part of the question is the only time I really ever had any contact with the prostitution issues was in Compton, and they had a special team that would deal with that. But every once in a while, when I was working overtime on patrol, you would see the girls, and all we did was we just pushed them up Long Beach Boulevard into Linwood and made it Linwood's problem.
Exactly.
And I'm sure Linwood pushed them back into ours.
But like you said, with Kavinsky here, like you're talking, Pat, his report with these girls was a good one. And when he stops at the liquor store to buy them their scotch and milk, he gets them all happy, and later on he lets them out. But I'm sure if this movie got any deeper, he cultivated a bunch of good informants there.
Yeah. Well, I never got into where you talk to people on street lingo. I always just was straight, talk to them just like this, and I've always felt that was probably more professional and more respectful because you weren't trying, you know what I mean? And I always had people who were willing to tell me stuff, right? And but I always treated them well, I just said, hey, this is just a job and just doing my job. Just relax. We'll get you to jail here. They weren't necessarily happy about it, but I didn't draw a lot of judgments about what they were doing, right? Because a lot of people, different paths to the life that they're in. And but I just think some of the misguided stuff coming out of Sacramento. This was a scene that we could talk about that. Yeah, you can.
The when the laws change, what people don't understand is that among your sex workers, most of them now are a result of human trafficking. And I saw that back when my last year at Compton was in 2009, 2010. A lot of the people that were coming across that the special operations team were arresting us when I was working DB there would be prosecuted and stuff or filing the cases on them. They were actually trafficked from different areas. So sex trafficking and the sex worker trade is huge. And as long as our lawmakers walk around with their eyes closed, it's only going to get worse, and it's only going to traumatize a lot more people. And this goes on from the ages of children all the way up into adults into their 50s and 60s. So
exactly. And the prosperity and money making. I know if you guys have seen that movie, Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
Which I thought was just an exceptional, great movie. But Yeah, like you said, Danny, it's been around forever, the prostitution thing. But now you throw in the human trafficking with the kids and uh, babies and everything else that leads into it. That it's a big problem that a lot of folks, a lot of politicians don't want to touch or don't want to talk about.
Well, I think some of them just don't see it as a violation, and I think that's a problem. And my problem with loitering with intent to commit prostitution, why it was bad, is sometimes you're the lifeline for that person who wants to get out of it. I'm glad we switched primarily from prosecuting prostitutes to seeing them as victims. That was a sea change for us. I think 2010-ish, around that time, maybe a little sooner than that. But it's true, and I'll say it because it just, I see what's going on with the whole Hunter Biden laptop and the fact that he was running around sleep with all these prostitutes, and I'm thinking, why isn't anybody upset about that? He's exploiting these women; they're clearly being trafficked, and nobody seems to want to address that issue. And so people with money can do whatever they want. It's okay. And I will add this: recently, they passed a law finally in Sacramento where they toughened the laws against traffickers, finally. But it took, you had to shame the liberal Democrats to do it. They didn't want to do it, and finally a Republican wrote that bill, and it finally recently got passed. I think they defined trafficking as a violent crime. I think that's what happened. So hey, Martin, how long do we got before our break here? He's not there. Are we ready?
Yes, I'm here. It was a little, my fingers were a little twisted.
Okay.
Yeah, we're about time for a
okay,
break.
Let's do our break.
Okay, here we go.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all: movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis, official scoops from Geekosity magazine, reviews, and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield, where they're always talking nerdy nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
So welcome back to Morning Coffee with the Chief. In addition to being on YouTube, we are also on Rumble. So when you're watching us on YouTube, I want you to remember to like the show, subscribe to the channel, and make a comment. When you like the show, it helps. Sometimes we talk about themes that aren't really all that exciting for YouTube. They don't really like it. So we talk about suicide and post-traumatic stress. But if you like the show, it helps us to get these stories out to other people, or this show out to other people that get suppressed by YouTube. Also, but you can find us on Rumble as well, Pop Culture Minefield on Rumble. On that platform, you have to follow us. Again, like the show, leave a comment, and help support the channel. Please go to the merch store as well, and maybe buy a coffee mug. I still got to do that. I'm still using my Hoosier Patty coffee mug, but I gotta get a Pop Culture Minefield mug, and I'm encouraging you guys to do the same thing to help support the channel. Okay, I think our guests are still taking their bathroom break. So Danny's there. So got two Dannys are back. Okay, hey. So the next scene I wanted to get into, and this is the shooting scene, and I think it's Gus who gets in the shooting. And you can see the beginning of post-traumatic stress, I think, with him as he's concerned about what happens. And this is somebody robs a store, I think, and then the owner, the owner of the store also chases him, and I think he's armed. And Gus thinks he's the suspect and ends up shooting him. Ultimately, it's considered it's a bad shooting, but it's a justifiable one, and there's a difference there. I guess we need to talk about. Justifiable homicide means is do the circumstances presented to you justify the use of deadly force. In this case, even though he wasn't the perpetrator, they understand the challenges that he faced, and they said it was justifiable shooting. But that is a burden that now is with this guy for the rest of his life, Danny Coon. So speak to maybe the post-traumatic stress related to a bad shooting, and if you want to get into legal stuff, you can do that too.
This poor guy. That is definitely something that will stay with him, as much as he's going to try to suppress that. For the rest of his life, he's going to be unable to. When I'm trying, being in a couple of shootings, and all of mine were justified also. They're there. They're always there. It's something that the first couple of weeks you're kind of numb after it, and then life starts getting on, and you start feeling a little bit more active, getting back into the job. And but they're always there, and it's always something. It's just out of the blue. It's going to pop up. You're driving down the street, minding your own business, and a memory from that incident will pop up, and that will start to just lead you into a path of depression, and just a negative path. And the only way for a lot of people, and you mentioned Robert Rangel earlier, and he was actually shot in an on-duty shooting, and the way he dealt with it, the way a lot of people do it, is you talk about it. You talk about it to your peers. So far in the psychological field for law enforcement, most law enforcement officers won't talk to the department provided psychologist, even though they're sent there. Most cops will go to peer support and talk to their peers about what's going on, and beyond being able to talk to your peers about it and release it, that takes away a lot of the stresses. And ultimately in this, near the end or at the end, it says he's going to be promoting or testing to become a sergeant. So he's gotten over it at the short term, but there's going to be long-term stuff that's always going to play out in his mind. And he always has to constantly talk to someone. Hey, I'm feeling this way about this issue, about this shooting. I know it happened 40 years ago, but I'm feeling this way. I gotta let out these emotions, because you cannot suppress them.
Well, I was there the night Bob got shot. We were working a vice detail, but I was the uniform guy because I had a trainee. So we were doing all the bookings, which is not really a fun thing to do when you're doing vice operations, because they always bring a lot of people in, right?
Yeah.
But hey, it was the trainee was doing it all. And Bob was really good at the dark humor too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I work with him. He found the irony and stuff. But I think something you said, and Danny Regalado, I don't know if you can add to this, is things come back to you. And for me, I remember with great clarity the shooting situations that I was in or arrived to. I didn't actually get into shooting, but I was Carson Lobby shooting, Terry Winger shooting. I had Terry on my show a few shows ago, and I was the first sergeant on scene to handle that mess, and I was there at Bob's scene shortly after he got shot. So you, even if you're not the guy involved, you remember with great clarity and great detail, and all the emotions come back. What do you think, Danny Regalado?
You know what? Unfortunately, in my career, 34 years, unfortunately, I was at a few of those shootings. When I first was not even a trainee, I was still doing ride-alongs. Was down in Carson. I'm trying to remember the deputy's name that was killed down there. This is like in the early 82, 81.
my
went into a house.
first day of training.
And I mean, that was my first experience with the deputy shot or killed on line of duty. And then, but like I said, I've been to several of them. I was on duty at several of them, and it just sucks, man. It's part of the job. Just like this young kid that we lost up north in Palmdale. It's just sad. And you see these guys, Yamamoto down in Firestone. I was there that day, and it's just it's part of the job. And you drive by things, or you see a sign on the freeway, Dave Powell, a good friend of mine from Lakewood who was killed. And you see these things, and they bring back the memory. And they bring back the bad part, but it also for me, you remember the good parts. Fun times with those guys, eating on the hood of the car. Dave Pell, a big example. We never talked a lot about police work when we were eating. It was always about family. He was a big guy and big church guy, and you talked about things like that. So you try to bring back those happy times that you were with them, but unfortunately it's part of the job, and it's part of the job that sucks. And the
Yeah.
PTSD, does that come back? Yeah, it affects you. It affects you. I think it affects you even if you're not the victim or if you're not there. I've had my times with, seeking out help. Uh, Unfortunately, me and my family were victims at Route 91. So we were there for that event, and we all went to get help afterwards, and we still do at times. But yeah, it sneaks up on you. Sneaks up
I
on you when you're not expecting it.
when I noticed, so the Carson lobby shooting, because I was there at Bob's, and it had an, I mean, you didn't sleep well for a few days, and you got over it, but what impacted me was when somebody that I was responsible for got shot. That was a completely different feeling, because I was filled with a lot of guilt. Like I should have done something. I should have been able to stop. Because you feel like, the deputies you're supposed to take care of them, and I felt the same way at the Chatsworth train crash. You had all these, we're supposed to get there and save people. You couldn't save them. They were dying, and they died in the arms of some of the deputies there. So there is a certain amount of guilt that goes along with the fact that you're a survivor, right? And
Yeah, well, that has to be when you're working with a partner and your partner gets shot or injured in any way. That, yeah, could I have done this? Could I turn the car left? Could I stop the car? Could I have ran with him?
yeah,
That has to be a whole different on you or as a person. Like I said, with mine, basically we were on duty, and these things happened, and you drive up to them, or you're at a call and it happens. But with the one that really, those affect you. But the one for me was the Route 91 one, because I guess, like you said, with you having a partner, I had my family there, my dog, and we're pretty close to that thing. So yeah, it takes you, it works your mind a little bit.
yeah. Let's
So you go back and remember. It was
Yeah,
Let's
let's
chain
go ahead
it
and
back
start
up
the
for that.
next scene. I love it and shooting, but I want to finish off this conversation with Danny Coons. It's survivor's guilt is something that's typical with the person who survives or is not injured, and when it's shooting, whether it's the military or law enforcement, right? And I looked at it logically. I'm having these feelings because this is how good people feel when things happen. I just need to understand those are my emotions, but logically I couldn't do anything about changing this, right?
correct.
And that,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
When we did the Onion Field, we talked. We briefly talked about survivor's guilt, but survivor's guilt is what killed Carl Hedinger. Carl Hedinger was in the Onion Field. Ian Campbell got shot. Carl Hedinger escaped, and for the rest of Carl Hedinger's life, he buried himself in alcoholism, suppressed his emotions as much as he could, lived, had suicidal ideation. He was a poster child at the time for post-traumatic stress injury, and it ended up killing him. He died at 59 years old, cirrhosis of the liver. So that tells you that it was alcoholism that killed him due to
The survivor's guilt is real. It's a real thing, and you saw it a little bit in your police, and even when I'm a time in the sheriff's department, I know a guy that to this day still suffers from that with the guilt, and you keep in contact with those folks, even though maybe you don't see them every day, but yeah, that survivor's guilt, so it's a real thing. Man.
That's even with Danny when Rick Hammett got killed up in Palmdale. He was working with the Palmdale narco crew, and I was working on the Lancaster narcotics crew. And even us in Lancaster, we had to go down and process the scene and finish their search warrant after it was all over with. And at the time, it wasn't two different stations. It was still Antelope Valley Station and you had the Palmdale sub. So we were all under one umbrella. And even the guys up in Lancaster had the patrol guys even had the same feeling. It was like, why him? Why this? Why that? And, you know, it's, especially when you're working a narcotics team and you're going in and busting down doors, you know, it really hits home is why did this happen to Richard when it could have happened to me or that? And that's just something that lays with you for the rest of your life.
And it's nonsensical. What I mean by that is it's not logical, because I feel the same thing about the Terry Winger shooting when the chaplain ride-along got killed. And yeah, I was the field sergeant, and I had some responsibility. I had dealt with the suspect earlier in the evening. I had his name in my notebook. That's how we figured out who it was. But you know, the thing about, you know, as I said, I walked through those things logically, and I realized none of this was unusual. What led to it, meaning nobody's actions were bad. I didn't do anything wrong. Terry didn't do anything wrong. It just happened. And you have to realize that, and you have to work past the emotion. And I just try. I've always been kind of a logical thinker, and so that's helped me to cope with the issues that I've dealt with.
That is definitely a coping mechanism, because I've done the same thing.
I do a lot of logic on a lot of things to cope with a lot of stuff, and it's got. I think stoic is also one of the things they call it. Although I'm not being all that stoic right now. Let's get to the next scene. I love it, and then the shooting happens, and you know, the interesting thing about this scene is Stacy Roy is talking about how much he actually loves it with Kilvinsky. And this scene, it just reminds me of a lot of guys who worked a lot of busy places, and they just get enamored with the hot calls and going to and fro, and just since you guys all worked busy areas, I did too. I was down in Linwood for a while, and Compton for a while, and Carson for a while, and so those were all pretty hopping places in the 90s, right? And I knew that I enjoyed all that stuff. But I will share. My dad worked the city of Detroit for 37 years, and so he worked a lot of very tough precincts, and it had an impact on him. And so he was a drinker there for a while, and I don't mind admitting he went on the wagon. He's been on the wagon for a long time. But when I got onto the sheriff's department, I made a very distinct decision, or a very clear decision, that I would roll out of those places and go somewhere else that was a little slower, and then roll back in if I had to. You know what I mean? And it kind of, as I promoted to sergeant lieutenant, yeah, you get pulled back in, and you know, whatever. It's not that I didn't like it. I just saw the impact that it had for people who worked those places for years. It can have an impact on you. And so I always felt I needed to go recharge my batteries by going somewhere else, which means some of the worst things that happened were at slow places, but you were going to have a greater likelihood of dealing with violent crime in some of these other stations. And so my perspective was a little different, but guys stay there because they love it. And I think ultimately that love it has a problematic impact on their families. I mean, I was working at Century, and I remember saying at a briefing, all right, some of you guys have been here for 10 years and you're passing up 3 perfectly good sheriff stations to come here. Why are you doing that? And when this is all over with, what do you have? You have your family. You might have some great stories. You might have some partners that you connect with every now and then, but you're there to support your family. You're there to give them what they need. You're the breadwinner. But ultimately, when your career is over with, and this is what I recognize, and I think it's because I was the son of a police officer, is what you have left is your family, and you need to make sure that that's the priority. But when he said he loved it, and he's kind of doing this, and it's more important to him, you can see that, you know, there's a disconnect from what he was before, the family guy. I don't know if you guys got that out of the scene, and what you guys think about that. What do you think, Danny Regalado?
You know, you say love it, and that's exactly it. Because I loved that job for probably 32 years.
Yeah.
I lived it. I loved everywhere I worked, all the partners I had, the rush, the pursuits, everything that goes with it, the after hours choir boy sessions, everything. But my last 2 years, I was pretty much beat up, and I didn't love it anymore. I liked it, but I knew liking it and doing that job wasn't enough. I didn't want to get anybody hurt. I didn't want to, get lazy. So I knew it was time for me to go. But yeah, that love it. I think you have to have that to a point. But when I got on, I was 22, 21, 22 years old. Uh, I wasn't married, didn't have any attachments, and I went like that for 8 years. And I went 8 years hard. Uh, and when I got to about 30, I thought, well, you know what? I got to make up my mind. Do I want a family? Do I want to get married? And fortunately for me, I found a really nice, beautiful wife. She worked at the DA's office, and we've been married for 32 years now. But yeah, that love it is a big part of it because I've seen guys that would come on the department either already married or mostly are married prior to getting on and just go completely bonkers. Like they just got let out at Disneyland or something, and next thing they're leaving their families or it's drinking a little too much. But yeah, it's like you said, Pat, were able to make a decision and separate yourself. Married guys, I would say, weren't able to do that, and it didn't end too well. But yeah, it's a train ride, man, and it's a good ride. But sooner or later, it's going to catch up to you if you don't, like you did, Pat, make a decision and say, you know what, I'm not going to go there, or I'm not going to go out after work with the guys today. But yeah, it's a tough one. That's why I tell a lot of young guys that are getting on, are you married? Or if they are, you talk to your wife about this because it's going to be a life changer for her. So.
Yeah, I for me it was choir practice was 1 day a week only is all I would do it. I wouldn't go out every night, and because I was in school and I had but that was the first few years was just like you. I was 21, I was single, I was working at a place where sex, drugs, and rock and roll was pretty hot, and so there were a lot of pretty ladies around. But I always tried to balance it. I wanted to get my degree. That was important to me. And so I tried to, balance is probably the right word, Danny Coon. What do you think? You think that these guys get into it? They love that adrenaline rush. They love it and they want to be there. Did you feel that? And there is an importance to maintaining balance throughout your career. If we got cops watching this show, this is really something you have to think about. What do you think about that?
That's correct. Most of us that get into law enforcement, when we come in young, we're 20, 21, 22, 23 years old. We have minimal life experiences. Those coming out of the military have a lot of more life experiences than the younger ones. But when I came on, it was shortly after the Vietnam War in '81. So we'd been separated from that for like 5 years. The department really wasn't hiring veterans at the time, war veterans. They were hiring veterans. And the department was more looking at hiring as many people as they could as a rush to build up for the Olympics. And it's pretty much been that in law enforcement since then. Guys come in at a young age, they're impressible, they're making the most money they've ever made in their life, which was, at the time when Danny and I came on, it was about $1,200 a month, Danny?
Yeah, because in the movie, Eric Estrada references how much he's making. I think he says $900.
Yeah,
and it's like, you remember that, and you go, man, 900. I got on, it's like 1,200. And but like you said, Danny, that was a lot of money for a single guy, like me. It wasn't making. I always had jobs up until then, but not that amount of money. And it was like, making wow, I'm making, what. Go ahead.
Working overtime, guys in the jails working overtime, and eventually you get into the adrenaline rush. We're all type A personalities, so you start that adrenaline rush. That's what you go for. That's what you want, and the job becomes you. That's what you start identifying as a job, and everything else doesn't matter anymore. You don't have any civilian friends anymore because all your friends are cop friends. You go to the river with your cop friends who are working the jail and have unlimited overtime and have their brand new jet boat every year, and these are who you're working with.
Like I said, I had an 8-year run that was, I can't, that's why I guess I don't do a lot of traveling now, is because I did a lot of traveling when I was single. You get a group of guys, the next, hey, we're taking a cruise here, or we're going to New Zealand. You want to get in on the trip, or, so I did a lot of my traveling when I was single and abroad. But, the choir practices were pretty much every night for me. I was single. I had a great friend at Linwood, and you probably know him, Danny Coon. And I miss him till this day. It was Mark Calderon.
Yeah, and, Mark, great guy.
And he's like a brother to me. And But that's another one. You hit it hard. You hit it hard. It comes a point to where yeah, I need to level this out and balance it out because this isn't gonna work for another 30 years or 25 years. But
Yeah, you cannot identify yourself with your job, and that's what a lot of people do. And I'm going to kind of segue this into the retirement section that I'm hoping to get to, Pat, because this is it's something that needs
Oh
to
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
discussed.
Yeah,
So we'll
it,
get
it,
into. I'll finish it when we get to there about the
okay,
identification.
and yeah, and well, I obviously I'm looking at this from the supervisor's perspective. Okay, so they split partners at a 211 progress. I go, what are they splitting partners for? Of course, this is a different time, right? And of course, Stacy Coon ends up getting shot, and
Stacy
and of course,
Keach.
or Stacy. I'm sorry, Stacy Roy gets shot. Sorry about that. And Roy gets shot, and at this 211 in progress, and yeah. So anyway,
well, things had to be different then because, like you said, the separating partners. But another thing, you watch that scene and it just shows how green Roy was still to take cover behind a car with people will not realize, hey, could these be people be involved? I think
yeah,
he's focusing because the guy in the store is black and the couple in the car are white.
yep.
And, it probably took his mind off of it. But yeah, exactly.
But
I watched that scene and going, man, what were you thinking?
it also shows the frustration of the wife as she's in the hospital that this is dangerous. She really doesn't want him doing it. She thought she's marrying this college guy that's going to become a lawyer. She doesn't really like this, and that's dynamics does happen. But I worked with somebody who had been shot. I partnered with the person after they've been shot. Little gun shy, eventually got over that, and so there's some things that go along with that. And if you are the victim, and I want to say that cops are the victims of assaults all the time. If you are a working cop, you've been probably assaulted multiple times a year if you're working the streets. In any of the major cities, and yet that people don't recognize that, but that does happen, right? It happens a lot, and in this case, he's the victim, but he goes through a long recovery, and they show him working out at the academy, which I thought that was not realistic. Maybe it's a different time period, right? You just kind of convalesced at home and came back when you came back, right? Maybe physical therapy nowadays, but he ends up coming back onto the streets, right? So it's Stacy. Now I'm going to go ahead, Stacy Coon again. Danny Coon, can you talk about the impact on a person once they've been shot and how that
I can't
happens?
specifically say about being shot, but I can talk about having a major injury. In regards to LAPD, back up until about the mid '80s, they would constantly go to the academy for different things, to work out, to play basketball, tennis, whatever they did. That they had also back then they had a bar at the academy, so and the shortstop was right down the street.
Yeah,
so.
right down the street.
Yeah, so that they had a lot of people going to the academy back then. After
we were as deputies, we were always up there at that academy because why? They had the bar. But yeah, you would see guys working out at their gym up near Legion Park at the old academy.
It was quite a bit.
It was always like hollowed ground, and if you went up there, you respected it, and we never had any problems. But yeah, that seems pretty realistic, I think, because we would always, even 84, 85, we'd still see them working out up there until they closed it down.
I think the difference between the LA County and LAPD, LA County Sheriff, is we're so spread out. It's hard to have that concentration. Right. People, you know what I mean? Because just for the audience, LA County is 10,000 square miles, and we had, when I retired, about 18,000 employees, but spread those 18,000 employees, 10,000 sworn over 10,000 square miles. And that's a lot of territory. Whereas LAPDs, I want to say they're 450 square miles. So only 10% of the size, but their patrol force or their police force, meaning the sworn, is about the same as ours, about 10,000. So it's easier to get a concentration of folks quickly, and it's easier to have places like the academy where there's a lot of people coming in and have a bar at the academy. They probably don't have that anymore, Danny.
Yeah, I don't think so. They had a bar and they had a restaurant up there too. We'd go eat out, but every Wednesday night was the night because that was payday. So every Wednesday you're up there at the at the watering hole.
I never got into that. I was, like I said, I was going to school hoping to be something else, I guess. I don't know, but and I will say when I finally graduated, I said, if I just I liked what I was doing, but if I put the same effort to go to law school into my career, I could probably finish as a lieutenant or a captain is really what I thought. And so I decided to do that, and it worked out for me. I did okay. So he's back to the streets. Let's start that. He's back on the streets, and people who go through traumatic situations like this, it's hard for them sometimes to come back to the street. Danny Coon, what do you think about that?
Well, like I said, in 1988, when I was working at East LA, I got hit by a Ford F-150 pickup truck doing 25 miles an hour in the corner of Whittier Boulevard in Bonnie Beach. I flew 22 and a half feet through the air, pirouetted through the air, landed on my back. I don't know why I didn't hit my head or get a concussion. I thank God for that. I did crack a rib because my baton slid up and cracked a rib. And I was off IOD for about 3 months. And for me, I couldn't wait to get back on the streets. I hated being at home. I hated it. It just sucked. So as soon as I could get back on light duty, I was on the desk. And as soon as I can get off of light duty and get back into the streets, it was great. But I did not heal properly. I still have little hip issues on my left hip. Mm-hmm. The pain when I was going back is you'd suit up and you're putting 25 pounds of weight around your waist every night. And I'd walk out, and there were times when I'd just come back in and tell the watch sergeant, I can't do this. And I'd go into the bunk room and lay down for a while because the pain was so bad. And kind of like what Stacy Keach was doing here, he was kind of pushing himself to get back to the streets because that's where your identity is, and that's what you want to do. And so coming back from that injury, I learned from that. I go, next time I get her, I'm going to stay out. I'm not going to stay out as long as I can. I'm going to stay out until I'm healed.
God, I remember this old Latino guy that I was working with. I can't think of his name now, but he got hit in the face, and his face was bleeding. And normally all of us, we get a hangnail, you go home now, right? The new generation. And and he was like, he just cleaned himself off and said, no, like me, it's just a Friday, right? No big deal. I'll go back to work, right? Put some ice on it. And he went right back to work. That Jimenez was his name. I can't remember his first name now, but it's an old tough guy, and said this was no big deal, and I'm going back to work. And but he goes back to street, and there is another shooting. And shortly after this shooting, it's a bank robbery, as you can see the scene here, and they're pursuing this guy. And it's I would say this is a pretty hectic shooting. I don't know if it was based upon a true story or not, but they end up taking the bad guy out. But shortly after this shooting, Kovinsky retires. Right. And this is where you wanted to get to, Danny. And I really wanted to talk about the retired. So through the whole show, you can tell that George C. Scott's character really identifies as a cop. I was surprised that he went through with the retirement. Also, that he went through at just 40%. That was it's like, how do you survive on just 40%? I guess you need to be saving, right? And he alludes to the fact that, well, I'm going to go live with my daughter and my granddaughter. And, there is, if you don't have it out of your system, I did 38 years, so I was definitely ready to retire. I was probably ready to retire a few years before I did. And I had been off the streets for a while as an executive. So, but I have to tell you, when I went on the streets as an executive, I enjoyed it. Remember when we all had to carp, all the captains and commanders had to carp, right?
I wish it was so much fun.
Well, they were supposed to, right? I don't know if they all did, right?
Yeah.
And so CARP for our audience is cadre of administratively reassigned personnel. So everybody's supposed to work the field for the day, even though they're administrative folks. And so I think it was a commander, and I decided to go on the field by myself. And I go right to the orange line, and sure enough, within 20 minutes, I run a guy, and he's got a felony warrant. I get hey, where are you at, sir? Where are you at, sir? And everybody comes running. And I enjoyed the fact that I could go right there, find the bad guy who was a meth guy. Obviously, I could recognize that, and he had a felony warrant. It was a pretty easy arrest, pretty basic stuff that I would have done at work in the streets, and I found him like that. And they came, of course, and took them off my hands because I didn't know how to log them on my MDT anymore because I hadn't done that in so long. So there's things I couldn't do anymore.
Well,
But
I respect the fact that you even went out in the field as a commander, Pat. That was you get star for that. I used to at Linwood. There used to be a commander. And I want to say his name was Commander White, but this guy would come out in his Eisenhower jacket, and he'd be on a T stop, and he'd pull up behind you, and hey son, are you doing okay? You need any help? Oh yeah, Commander. But that wasn't even carpet. He would just go out in the field because he wanted to. But yeah, that carping, man, I think you got the better half of that, Pat.
well,
Unfortunately, you're in violation of department policy, but
well, it reminded me how much I enjoyed the streets, and it was that I was pretty good at catching criminals. Somebody said to me, years later, somebody said, "Oh, we remember you. You took a lot of people to jail," and I did. I grew up blue collar, and I felt if I come to work, I got to take people to jail. That's what I'm supposed to do, and that was the culture of our department too when I came on, right? Yes, and I felt more comfortable being busy. I didn't like just sitting around waiting for something to happen. I'd rather have somebody in the backseat of my car. But I did get street cred because I went out by myself, and my only weakness was having to log. Did you put him in the back seat? What does that mean? What's this code? What's that code? I didn't understand any of that anymore. And it took me a half hour just to get my log entry right. And thankfully the guys took the guy away because I hadn't booked anybody in years. But I did get a little bit of street cred, but I can understand, you like it. And then Kilvinsky retires and, he's not ready. So talk a little bit about when guys retire and they identify a lot with the department. I think you wanted to talk about that, Danny Coon.
Yeah, for starters, when I retired, I was done when I was retired. It's my last year at Parks Bureau working South LA. After that summer was over, and Danny remembers that was the summer we had a shooting in the park and had all kinds of weird stuff happen. And I was done. So it was easy for me. And I remember a friend called me up and says, "Hey, when you turn in all your equipment, take someone with you. Take someone with your old partners so you don't get upset and handle it." And I looked at him. I thought, "You're crazy," because I had this box at home with 31 years of junk that the department gave me that I had to give back. Yeah. I carried it around for several different moves, and they got it back. And even when we were in personnel, my wife was with me. We were in personnel and get my retirement ID. The lady that was I call him a handler. The lady that was handling my case, she remarked to my wife how easy it was for me. And she goes, "A lot of guys, when they sign this paper, giving up their status as a peace officer, they cry, they can't handle it. But your husband's handling it fine." Well, that's because I was done. Now in Kavinsky's case, he wasn't done. He was tired. He probably realized, I'm getting too old for the streets, and there's LAPD doesn't have anything else to offer me. Unlike the sheriff's department, we have a gazillion jobs. LAPD only has a handful, and there was no place for him to go. So he probably decided, okay, 20 and done. I can do something else, and I'll be happy. But he because he lived that adrenaline, and he identified definitely as a patrol cop. And what I call retirement for guys like that is that it's an unfriendly divorce.
Yeah.
Whereas you go back, and in the scene, he goes back to the station, and the guy working the desk goes, "Hey, can I help you, sir? Who are you?" And Kilvinsky goes, "Oh, I used to work here, And one of the guys comes up, "Yeah, this guy used to run this place," and really nobody knows who he is anymore, because the week after you leave on a Friday, Monday morning, your seat's filled and everybody else in that whole building forgets you. And that's unfortunately how it is, but that is how it is.
Because like the greatest thing, and unfortunately, you're nothing but a number.
Exactly.
You're that employee, that 6-digit number that follows you your whole life. You're that number. But like you said, yeah, he wasn't ready to retire yet, and there was no place for him to go. But then again, you see guys like that are, I call them lifers, that just can't retire, then go back, and then
they do 38 years. And retire as a chief.
Yeah, exactly. But you've seen those guys that you're going, man, why'd you go? Why'd you even leave if you're going back? It's like, but it's because, unfortunately for him, he had nothing else.
Yeah,
that was his life.
It was like when I left East LA, I never went back. I had to go back to go to court and stuff, but I never really went back. when I left the Antelope Valley, I never went back.
You know, I haven't been back either. My daughter works for the department, so I went down to the station that she works at. But it was like, and I had worked that station, but it was like a weird feeling.
Yeah,
You know,
it's that
I
unfriendly
didn't
divorce.
miss it. Yeah, I didn't really. I miss it because I think I left on my own. You know,
Yeah.
I made my decision to leave, and that was it. And I didn't love it anymore.
Yeah, in that terms,
So
you had visitation rights. You didn't have any other
Yeah.
rights other than you had
Yeah.
visitations rights. You could go there and visit. Now
Well, I
going
was
on to
I was the
Kilvinsky's story.
chief of East Patrol Division. I was enjoying my life here. It was nice and quiet. A lot of mature people on the 7th floor. They got me my coffee. You know, it was good, but it was time to go.
Yeah,
I was okay with being has been once was. I was okay with that. I'm sorry. Interrupt. Go ahead, Danny.
it's all
Coon.
bueno. You know, in Kilvinsky's case, and this is where, you know, I alluded to earlier when we started, is the Long Beach police detective sergeant who committed suicide or died by suicide at South Station of Long Beach PD. And I believe that was in 2017, in January of 2017. And I've had a few friends who have passed away due to suicide. One after they retired, and unlike, you know, dying by suicide by sticking a gun in your mouth, people who die by suicide who are retired use other ways, mostly alcoholism, and another way is just not taking care of yourself. You run hard for 30 years, then you go home and you become a couch potato, and that's kind of what Kilvinsky did. He ran hard. He went out. He couldn't find life with his granddaughter and daughter in Florida, and who would want to move to Florida anyway? They got bugs like really big that fly. And
we got the 70s rock band guy. Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And, you know, he goes back to what he knew, and he goes back to the streets in LA, and he tries to hook up with his old friends, and unfortunately life moves on. They didn't have time for him.
Well, exactly. In his last scene, when he's in his apartment, you know, he calls up Roy.
Yeah.
He's trying to revive that old. Hey, you remember? Did I tell you about this time? You know, trying to get those war stories going, and you know, Roy's got his own problems going on, and you know, fortunately, that's what when he commits the act. But it's like, yeah, he left when he wasn't ready, and he had nothing to go to.
Yeah.
Well, so let's roll into those two scenes, and then we'll continue the conversation. So we got two scenes that we'll catch up a little bit too, because I'm a little behind. And one is they get rid of crime just by changing the laws, because I'll get into a discussion with you guys that in a minute. And then also Kilvinsky comes back, suicide. So just go ahead and roll those two scenes, Martine. And so before we get into Kilvinsky's suicide, let's address the elephant in the room on the. It was so interesting when they talked about. Just changed the laws. And I think this is also where they talked about the new Centurions. So this is the reference in the movie where the old guard and Kilvinsky's kind of the old guard, and the new guard of these three young guys. And then they reference new Centurions, and then in old Rome, where I was just at, the Centurions, even they needed policing. And so it implies that they were down on policing at the time. And this was coming out of the 60s into the 70s. And there was a lot of anger at police like we have now. And there was a lot of accusations that the criminal justice system was racist and not fair, and we need to do something, and it's all the cops' fault. Sounds very familiar with what's going on tonight. But one of the things that really caught my attention in the movie, and Wamba probably was a soothsayer, and he predicted this. He saw it then, and he predicted what would happen in the future, is politicians can just change the laws to deal with crime. And that's exactly what they did with Prop 47. They changed the laws, they decriminalized some stuff, they lowered the crime and stuff, and then they say, well, everything is fine, right? Everything's fine. Recidivism went down because these guys aren't coming back to prison. Well, we're not prosecuting like we did before. So that's really an artificially low recidivism rate. So Kilvinsky and Wamba, who wrote those words, were right on then, and that's what we're dealing with right now in terms of Prop 47. Danny, you are soon to be Danny Regalado, you're soon to be a California refugee as you go to another state to escape. Talk about the changing of the laws and what has happened the crime that we
But
had before, we lowered it, now it's going back up again, and the comment changing laws, politicians.
first of all, wasn't that a great scene? Because
Yeah.
how back then, when this movie is made to now, that what he's saying is everything that's happening now. You know, he's talking about the laws changing and the peacekeeper and also the evil. He mentions evil. He goes, you know, and that's what he asked him. That's what I'm fighting is evil. And yeah, the laws now. Come on, Pat. California is so to the left. It's not even funny. You know, you can justify staying here because of the weather. Unfortunately for me and my family, I can't justify that anymore. You got the no bail system that's coming on board. You've got, you know, laws that our governor is passing that are completely left, whether you're law enforcement or even a parent, that it's just mind boggling. You know, common sense is not even a factor in any of it. And like I tell my daughters is that, you know what? My one daughter does live out of state. I've got two that are here, but I tell them, you know, I don't know how you're going to here or how are you going to function here with these laws, and you know, you can't go anywhere. I mean, people are running out of stores with everything that they can carry, and it's just, you know. So this scene was, you know, when I rewatched the movie, that scene with him and Roy talking about laws and how crime changes now, criminals are always going to be there. It was really I thought it was a great scene in the movie.
Yeah, and it was almost like Wamba predicted that we're going to go through this cycle again, right? I mean, it was almost like he predicted that because I mean,
Exactly.
we're talking about a movie that's fictional, but it is based upon the personal experience of somebody who retired as a police lieutenant, Joseph Wamba, and he saw this, and he was, you know, in all of his books, Danny Coon, in all of his books, there is social commentary about what is going on. And in addition to the darkness of law enforcement, it's social comment, and that adds to the darkness that we're holding back the darkness with to maintain the light in law enforcement, and the politicians just change the rules midstream, and of course, and currently they just blame us. So, what are your thoughts on that scene and, you know, this clairvoyant thinking of Joseph Wamba?
What I always tell people, because people ask me, if you're in law enforcement, you're retired, would you do it again? And I always say, oh, heck yeah, in a heartbeat, because it was a great job. And they say, well, even what's going on now? And I go, it doesn't matter, because I go by the pendulum. And we have all our careers all same in the basic time period. We've seen that pendulum swing from the left to the right, back to the left, kind of hang out in the center. We've seen it several times. We've seen it before us was in the 60s and the 70s with the Watts riots and the East LA riots. And then into the 90s with the Rodney King riots, the pendulum swung again. And then it kind of started coming back. Bill Bratton took over LAPD and brought in the broken windows thing, and things started swinging to the right for us. And then something else happened. Oh, there was Arco Narco and the Rampart thing that really whipped us over to. And that pendulum is always swinging. And then, Pat, you're into history. You know, history always repeats itself. And
Yeah.
That's what we're doing now. It's just a repeat of what's happened in the past. We've seen it. You know, it's written about. So all you do is you get out your history books and read about it and see, okay, this is how they dealt with it then. This is how we're going to get it now. Because it's just the players change. The incidents don't.
Yeah, so I'll do a rant, and I think if you guys have been watching me, you might have heard some of this kind of stuff before where, you know, the whole defund the police movement. Okay, there's no way if you take away 10% of a police budget, let's say the city of Los Angeles, let's say you take 10% of their budget away, it's $150 million, and you spread it out over 15 council districts, that's $10 million a district per year, which is a drop in the bucket. However, if crime rockets upward, for every dollar you take away from the police, you're probably losing $10 in private investment in the community. I was working down at Century Station. They didn't have a Starbucks anywhere, but we lowered crime and a Starbucks opened up. And I was thankful because I was hooked on Starbucks at the time. But if you lower crime, investment rolls in, private investment rolls in, and you cannot duplicate the kind of private investment that rolls in when crime is low with government funding. You simply can't do that. So the investment of law enforcement in a community to lower crime brings in private investment, which brings in jobs and brings in hope. That's what I believe. That's what happened. That's what we did. In 1993, we had 13.1 homicides per 100,000 in the state of California, much higher in LA County and LA City. In 2014, the year they passed Prop 47, we had 4.4. That is a huge drop. We saved tens of thousands of lives, likely throughout the state of California, with the work that we did. Now that's going up. The crime is also going up, and businesses are closing, so hope is leaving. So that's really what's going on. But okay, that's my rant. I know you guys agree with that. If you don't, you can chime in. But I really want to get to the suicide thing. So hey, on triggers, Kavinsky ends up killing himself, right? And we've talked about, maybe he identified too much with work, and but there are triggers, right? There are things that people go through psychologically or thinking wise, that if you're outside, you see somebody behaving in a certain way, or if you're going through it themselves. Danny Coon, do you understand some of those triggers or those points? And what should you do if you're feeling this suicidal? I think you call it adulation or
Ideation.
So what should a guy or a gal do if they're feeling that? Where should they go?
Yeah.
What should they do? Give us a couple minutes of that.
Suicidal ideation is another word for suicidal thoughts, and people have suicidal thoughts all the time. And most of the people that have suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts don't act out on it. They get over it, or they just meet someone else, or someone sees a sign, and the signs are. It's kind of, you really have to know the person. You have a radio car partner. You know everything he does. You know everything his family does. You can see a change in him. And I had a partner. We weren't even radio car partners. We were on the same shift. And this is back in the 80s. And I saw something. Hey, dude, there's something wrong. What's going on? And he opened up. And that's what as your partners have to do, or that's what someone has to do. It's real hard for a person to sit there and say, I need help, because they're afraid to ask for help, because then they say they see themselves. It's part of that stigma where you're a failure if you ask for help. And that will stick with you. I'm going to ask for help. Well, now I'm going to be transferred. I'm going to be working the desk, or I'm going to ask for help. So, they're going to send me on day shift on the desk where the brass can watch me, or I want help. They're going to stick me off on IOD and make me go to the psych until the psych figures out I'm in for duty and get fired. And that's the stigma behind it, is especially when you're retired guys right now. They're not getting help. They're talking to their friends, but they're not going out and getting help, because we have this little coveted thing we call our retirement credentials, and that can be taken away at any time. It can go from retired Los Angeles County Deputy Sheriff to retired Los Angeles County employee in a heartbeat at the whim of the sheriff. If he thinks you're mentally ill and you're going to go out and do something stupid, he could pull a lot of your credentials from you. And it's sad that we have to live under those conditions, but we're also, the community is starting to, the first responder community in general is starting to realize that what the stigma is, and the stigma is real, and the stigma is hurting people. And they're starting to understand what's going on and talk more. And executives are starting to, instead of going out and playing golf, they're going out and going to, not that you ever did it, sir.
I don't play golf, but
yeah.
Well, in the movie, if you back up before he's in his apartment and he goes to the station, there's that scene in the parking lot where I think you could tell he's trying to reach. I think he's already thinking of committing suicide, but he's trying. And Stacy Keach looks at him and goes, "Hey, can I call you tomorrow?" And
exactly.
But Stacy Keach gives him a strange kind of look, like, "Hey, something ain't right, but I just don't have time to talk right now." And then the same thing happens when he's in an apartment and he's calling Stacy Keach. That's another point where he's still trying to reach out. Hey, what are you doing tomorrow? Can we meet tomorrow? And Stacy Keach again has something else to do. And he goes, "Oh, okay. I'll get back to you." And unfortunately, he commits suicide. But yeah, there's little things in those two scenes that I think he's actually showing that he's reaching out for some kind of help.
Yeah, when people reach out, you have to sit down and listen. And if you followed my Bulletproof First Responder Facebook page, or even my personal Facebook page, you've seen me and probably 100 other people that we will post regularly just saying, if you need help, get help. Call me if you need help. Talk to someone if you need help. I do this probably 3 or 4 times a month. Just
Yeah, and
trying
that's
to get people.
And you
to
do a
talk.
great job, Danny. You really do. I see your posts, your Facebook stuff. You always comment back on my stuff, and I just applaud everything you do.
if somebody
Yeah.
is reaching out, take it serious. That's one of the messages I'm hearing here, right?
Correct.
And if you are feeling suicidal or you're questioning thing, it's not unusual for somebody who's worked law enforcement, has post-traumatic stress, to feel, or in military or whatever, to have feelings that are dark and bad, but you need to do, it's like anything else. If you got pain in your neck, you go to the doctor, right? Or maybe you don't, but most people do. If you're feeling pain emotionally, you need to do something. Go and do something, right? I think that's the message that that needs to come out of this, right? And
if you need help, get help. There's several agents. There's Cop to Cop, which is a 24-hour helpline for police officers and their families. There's Cop Line, which is a 24-hour suicide prevention hotline for police officers and their families. And the good thing about Cop Line is they're retired cops that are specially trained to talk to you. And I have several friends from our department that are members of Cop Line, and they do a great job, and they're usually pretty much up. But help is there but you got to take that first step. A friend of mine, he is the co-founder of an organization called Mighty Oaks Warrior Programs.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a faith-based program for veterans, active duty, and first responders. And one thing that he always says is you have to march or die. You have to put one step in front of the other and move forward, or otherwise you're going to die. And it may not be a physical death. It could be just a spiritual death, or it could just be you're going to be in this hole for the rest of your life. But you always have to make that first step forward to get over whatever you're going through now.
Okay, let's go ahead and roll into the new. We lost Danny Regalado there for a minute. Hopefully he'll come back in. But go ahead and roll into Callbox and Rethinking Policing. I got a couple more scenes after this to do, so we're going to have to speed it up a little bit. But I wanted to talk a little bit about drinking and law enforcement. Sometimes, when I first came on, there was a big culture of drinking. That's changed. That changed towards the tail end of my career, but that would have been consistent with what we're seeing here. The drinking and relying on drinking to cope. I mean, there's two things. There's the peer pressure to drink, and then there's the drinking to cope with the issues that you have. Hey, welcome back, Danny Regalado. So talk about the drinking to cope and drinking because of peer pressure.
Oh, the drinking to cope. There's some nights where you need that. Unfortunately, you need that drink. Yeah, I think that's where I've had a lot of experience in the bar and the choir boy scene. And there's some guys there that, like you said, are drinking because unfortunately they're alcoholics.
Yeah.
And they've turned into that. And does a job drive that? Yes, I think it does. It's with the stress, the PTSD, everything with it. But I've had did I drink a lot from those 8 years? Yeah, I did. Did I overdo it? Yeah, I did. If I hadn't gotten married, would I still be here? Probably not, because I probably would have drank myself to death.
Yeah.
After I got married, I toned everything down. You have a family, you make commitments, and things change. But it's like you making decisions, Pat. To separate yourself and go to a slower place and then come back. It's all decisions you have to make. Some guys get caught up, and everybody does. It gets caught up in that fast life, action, let's go drinking after work, and one night turns into 2 nights, and the next thing you're on a 7-night binge, and it's part of it. It's the drinking.
I think the first deputy involved shooting where I rolled to, we were the first unit there, and so we kind of got the handle. I was with Steve Skirnich. You guys remember that name?
Yeah, Steve's
Yeah,
good.
I just talked to him yesterday.
Steve and I were partners. I got to have Steve on. He'd be very entertaining.
Yes.
And so maybe you have to shoot me his number. But we were there, but we all went out drinking afterwards. And it was 6 a.m. when we finally finished, and we realized the second suspect wasn't in our containment. And we did eventually catch him. It was the Lynn McEwen shooting. But we all went to the bar afterwards, and that is the coping mechanism of stuff that happens, right, Danny Coon? So when you have a busy night, whether it's a shooting or something, maybe you
Yep.
go to a scene where a baby gets murdered or what, you go to the bar and you cope, right?
Yeah, I wrote a blog about this.
Yeah.
Alcohol and law enforcement have coexisted for probably as long as law enforcement's been around. In fact, every cop movie, cop show, whatever, there is a drinking scene in there, with the exception of Adam 12. Adam 12, they did have a scene where they were loading beer into a trunk of a radio car to go to a party. But there's, other than that, there was never a drinking scene in Adam 12. In fact, in the movie or in the TV show, was it Homicide: Life on the Street in Baltimore? The homicide detectives owned the bar they were drinking at. And it's just how everything is. It's coexisted forever.
Everything was always settled at the bar.
Or in the back parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. If it was a busy night, or if you had a good night, or somebody had a good call or a pursuit or whatever, it always ended up back there. I mean, you always had your watering hole, whatever station you were at. But the drinking on duty, I only ran into that one time in my 34-year career where a guy was doing it, and as a group, we took him to the side and told him, hey, you can't do that because we depend on you out here. Okay, if you need some help or something, we can get you that, or we can, but you can't do that. You're gonna either have to quit or leave the shift.
It was a
couple years ago. I'm sorry. A couple of years ago, the University of Phoenix did a survey on one police department, and they took guys that had just come out of the academy and started, and followed them through their first 5 years. And in the beginning, none of them really drank. They'd, occasionally with their spouses or significant others, but they never drank after work or never drank with their peers. And slowly over the next 5 years, as the stress built up, and as I just want to hang out with the hard guys, the cops that are going out every day and working hard and doing this. And it ended up to where a substantial number of the cops that they were following became either alcoholics or became habitual drinkers.
It's just part of the culture. It's a part of the culture of the job.
Exactly.
I started when I got on, was probably 22, and my drinking probably started then when I was working Hall of Justice Jail after we'd get off shift, and that was an every night thing. And then you graduate, you go to your patrol station, and maybe that stops for a little bit because you're on training. But once you're off training, guess who's buying the beer and the booze at the bar? The new guy, So that's just part of the culture. That's just it's the mechanism of relieving stress too. But
I think because
unfortunately, some guys just can't get off of it.
I grew up the son of a police officer, and I just purposely avoided that. That was okay. I'm going to be measured about it because I had some things I wanted to do, but so because I came out at 21, I could have been very vulnerable like you.
Well, like you said, you grew up with it as a kid, Pat. So you maybe probably saw some negative sides of it.
Yeah,
you didn't want anything to do with.
Yes.
With me, I was 22. My dad had just passed away when I was 20. So I really didn't have a father figure per se anymore. So the guys at the station, the older guys, TOs, they were more of a father figure to me than that I had. But yeah, I mean, so you just went along. Hey, we're going out drinking after work. Okay, we're going out here. We're driving we're jumping in the van. We're all going to Palm Springs after shift. That was just the get go. But like I said, I had a good 8-year run, but had I continued it, I don't know if I'd still be here.
Okay, hey Martine, just go ahead and keep rolling in the next two scenes. It's they've got the gun, and this is the guys working together, and the final domestic. And just to bring us up to speed here, Stacy Coon is got cleaned up. He meets a nurse, and she cleans him up from being alcoholic. He falls in love with her, and he's planning a future together, and he's also changed his thinking. He's questioning Kilvinsky's laws or his philosophy that it's all about the streets, because it's not all about the streets, which is what I said when we began talking about this. It's like, hey, listen, we're here to support our families, to raise our families. That's really the ultimate goal, and this is a means to the end. And it's a very honorable career, and you can enjoy it. It can be a kick in the pants at times, but ultimately, when you're done with it, you're left with a lot of memories, maybe some good friendships, but you're left with your family. So you got to invest your time and energy in your families as well. And I think that's what Stacy Coon. I'm gonna do that again. I think that's what Roy figures out. Stacy Keach figures out. I'm sorry, so sorry about that. Danny Coon, and which is good, right? And then after he's doing this, he ends up with the three guys. They come, and I like the way they did this in the movie. They come back together for. In the book, they explain this is the Watts riots. They come back together. That wasn't necessarily clear in the movie, and they're working a three-man hoop. I was wondering, why are they working three guys together? It's just a convenient way to close this out. But they get to see the change in all these guys. Gus is now, he wants to study to be a sergeant. He's matured. He's moving on. He's dealt with his survivor's guilt of the shooting he was involved in. Our Eric Estrada, he's deep. Sergio, I think, is his character name. He's now deep in. He's the cop now, and he's angry that the guy got away, and he's embarrassed that he got away from him. Which, that does happen. Guys get away, they lose their guy, they're embarrassed with everybody else. I said, hey, he outran you, man. He's 10 years younger than you. It happens, But he expresses himself by smashing the windows out there. And then Roy is he's probably the person who's probably matured the most here, in that he's a little more realistic about his career. I think I know Gus is too, because he's studying to be a sergeant, but Roy has come back off that. It is a means to an end for him, and there are other things in life, and that's what he's learning, and that's what he finds out. So what do you think of the scene where they all come back together and the character change in them? Because it does change you, law enforcement. Danny Regalado, what do you think?
I think Roy finds his happy spot finally. I mean, he's gotten past the wife thing. She pretty much tells him, hey, the only reason I married you because I thought you were going to be a lawyer. So, and he tells her that, I'm a cop. That's who I am. I think he gets past that. He gets past the shooting, and he's in a happy place. He's like questioning Kavinsky's law as far as, this being a cop is 100%. But I think a little bit, he drops his guard a little bit, especially in the last scene going up the stairs. I think he's, and a lot of this whole movie, officer safety was not the pinpoint or the star of the show, because there's a lot of scenes, even going into the bank by himself and all that. But going up the stairs and then boom, getting shot. I mean, and he realizes, he says, why now? I'm just starting. And like you said, he had the girlfriend. He was in a happy place, and but that's the sucky part of this movie. Just like another movie, real quick. I don't know if you've ever watched it, End of Watch. It came out like 5 or 6 years ago. And if you ever want to see a great movie, watch that, because the cop on cop scene partner thing in it is phenomenal, but the ending sucks. But this one, Roy, I think, is in this happy place, and unfortunately, he gets shot.
I think to clarify for the audience, officer safety, I think became more and more prevalent in how you operated in the 70s going into the 80s. That's my perception, right? That we really started focusing on the reduction of incidents by teaching officers how to better tactics, I guess is probably the way to say it. And so you're seeing probably old tactics in this situation. But Danny Coon, what do you think of them coming together and the change in these guys?
It's actually kind of cool because it shows how each of them matured. A saying that I like a lot is, we get into this profession to change the world, and we leave with the world changing us, which is very true. And officer safety there was none in the 60s. And to Danny's point, Danny, do you remember handling a silent robbery alarm at a bank in '85 in Linwood? Because I know how we handle them now, and I know how we did them when I retired, but I don't remember how we handled them back then, because it was totally different to the way we do now.
We probably would have Yeah, well, like you said with this one too, with this movie here, obviously no one wears vests in this movie.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing, obviously, because they probably didn't in the 60s or 65. 85, were we vested up? Yeah, we were a little bit better on tactics. Yeah, but would a carload of Linwood guys going? Yeah, we probably would. That's because what we did. We went to the crime. We didn't drive away from when the bullets were flying. Everybody drives towards them while
Exactly.
everybody else is driving away. So yeah, 85. Yeah, we probably go
Yeah,
into that bank
that's what I
too.
was trying. I figured we probably just all went in. And you talk about vest up. Early mornings at East LA in the 80s. There's probably 4 of us that wore a vest. All the old heads,
Wow.
they never did.
Wow.
That
I know
was-
there was some resistance when I came on in 83, on the streets in 85. So, but there was the little postage stamp too, it only covered your heart. It didn't cover enough. I mean, we got
basically your chest.
yeah, we got the wraparound vests
But the
I-
guys
it-
getting all together at the end and talking about, Gus wanting to be a sergeant and Roy alluding to the fact that he's in love now, which changed his whole attitude. And when you something that Danny did and something that with my second marriage I did is I was a cop before I got married. And it's easier. My wife was also a cop when I married her. So it was easier for us to understand what we're doing. And that she would understand what I faced every night. I would understand what she faced every night. So that worked out well. And Danny got married after he was a cop. And so when he was dating his soon to be wife, knew that what she was going to be putting up with. So it was no
Yeah,
surprise.
she was a little more familiar because she worked at the DA's office. So she would see all the guys coming in and finally, so she knew the life. But that's something you have to score away right when you get married that, hey, this is the life I live.
Yeah.
This is what I do. So it's not going to get better. It could get a little bit worse, but you've all done it, working 16-hour days, skipping birthdays, Christmas, whatever, but that's just part of it. Unfortunately for me, I found someone that was willing to go along for the ride, and she's still here, and it's worked out. But a lot of people wives don't want to do that, and you can't really blame them. But it is what it is. Either you're going to change and leave, or going to get divorced.
Exactly.
well,
Yeah.
my
And
number
with-
one fan is listening. My wife is listening. She always does. She's a good critic, and she knew me in high school. So this is my second marriage, but she knew what she was getting into, marrying a police officer, and it was nice having. And she's always been a champion of the things that I do, including this show. But I need to move to the final scene, and so the thing about this is when Roy gets killed. Stacy Keach, not Stacy Coon. Roy gets killed, and and Gus, can somebody get a blanket? I think the thing that I come away with this scene, and it's also something that I came with the shootings that I rolled to and handled as a sergeant, is suddenly you feel very I don't want to say alone, but very it's about you and the guys that you're working with, the gals you're working. You become very it's about, you know what I mean? It's you have this feeling that you're the only ones going through this. The community can't really go through these things with you, and I believe the community always has supported us and still do today. But you become very closed when those kind of things happen, right? It becomes very personal for you, and I'll give you guys both a chance to talk about how you felt about that last scene. I thought it was very dark. I had forgotten about this last scene. But Danny Coon, what did you think about that? And what do you think about the comments where you tend to think it's just you guys going through that pain, and you become very closed as a group?
You close in when Rick Hammett got killed. We sorry, it's hard. When he got murdered, we all kind of like it. We knew it wasn't us against the community, because the community was 100% behind us. But at the also, we were all hurting, and no one else could understand why. Everybody else, it's just another person. It's just someone you worked with that got killed at work. No, this is something more than that. And it's kind of hard to explain, but it's just because it could be someone from me working in Lancaster and someone from Lameda getting killed at work. It's still, even though we don't know each other, there's 10,000 of us, we came on at different times. It still hurts because we're part of that same family. And we might fight a lot between our family, but at the end of the day, we are one big family, and we hold very close ties to each other. And when your partner dies or when someone dies in the line of duty, it just hurts. It's nothing to do with the community. We love the community. And they love us, but it's just that internal pain it's hard to deal with, and you can only deal with it with your peers.
Danny Regalado, you inspired the show by saying do a Joseph Wambaugh movie. I'll give you the final thoughts and stick around for a debrief for a few minutes afterwards, okay?
What Danny says it all. I mean, I think my very first experience with losing someone that you actually worked with, drank coffee with, ate with on the radio was Jack Miller.
Yep.
When he went to Narco. And that was like a heartbreaker for all us guys at Linwood, because Jack was such a great guy and a great cop and just a fun guy to be around. And when that happened, that was probably the first one that really sucked. And as you go on in your career, you lose other friends. And unfortunately, I've had a few. But and I stopped going to funerals and things like that because it just sucks for me personally. But like this kid up in Lancaster, what a waste.
Yep.
What just a waste. And what can you say? And but salute him and what he did and how he handled his job while he was on the department. And like you said, we're family. You all feel it. And not only you as a cop, I mean your family, my wife, my daughter, you all feel it.
His dad and I worked together. I dedicated a show 2 weeks ago to Ryan Clinton Bloomer, and I saw him I went out of town on the day before I went out to Europe. I went by a memorial and managed to see Mike, and I made an appointment to see him for lunch here soon. So, hey, we're done with this show today. Martine, go ahead and finish us up. You guys stick around for a quick debrief. Martine.